as the rule of law has bent and been broken by Trump and his movement, we've also seen the democratic system bend and get broken by Trump and his movement. Obviously, we did not have a peaceful transfer of power the last time he competed in and lost an election. There is no commitment at all, no expectation at all by anyone that he and his followers will allow for a peaceful transfer of power this next time, if he loses this next election as well. He's not even giving lip service to the idea that they will allow for a peaceful transfer of power. He won't even say it and not mean it. And even more importantly than that just coming out of his face, in his Republican Party, accepting that his followers will not abide the results of the next election, and neither will the Republican Party in all of its power, in all of its resources. Accepting that is now the price of admission to power in that party. In March of this year, the Republican National Committee hired 2 new lawyers to oversee the party's election year legal efforts. Now, just 2 months after that, of those 2 lawyers, one of them's been indicted for helping in the effort to keep him in power illegally after he lost the last election. And the second one of those 2 lawyers has just been pushed out of his job at the RNC, reportedly because he's not willing to do the same thing. Quote, Trump originally approved of the hiring, one source told CNN, but sources said Trump was then angered after his allies pointed to clips of the lawyer criticizing the false claims that the 2020 election was stolen. So 2 lawyers hired by the RNC to oversee legal efforts around the 2024 election. One of them herself now under indictment. The other one reportedly fired for casting doubt that the last election was stolen, for suggesting that the real election results were a real thing. Think about that for a second. The chief counsel of the National Republican Party just fired, reportedly, because he was insufficiently enthusiastic about falsifying election results, about working to throw out real election results and get Trump into power despite them. I know this feels like, like an incremental update on the day's news, but just step back from this for a second. If it is now the de facto position of the mainstream Republican Party that we are not going to use the real results of elections to decide who is in power, if in order to be in a position of authority in the Republican Party now, you must now pledge to reject election results, then tell me, how are we going to decide who is in power in this country? What's the other mechanism we're going to use if it's not real election results? Democracy is mortal. It can be killed. It doesn't go away by someone, one day proclaiming, we are no longer here by a democracy. It goes away when there stops being an expectation that we are governed by democratic means, when there stops being an expectation that elections are how we decide who's in power. Right? The way you lose your democracy is by losing the expectation that we are participating in an election because all sides in that election plan to accept the result, right? To go home if they lose and to go into office if they win. Once we no longer expect that, we are no longer in a democratic system of government in many important respects. Once one of the 2 major governing parties no longer believes elections are binding, then in many important ways, the democracy ship has sailed because they are no longer competing on democratic grounds. Once one of the 2 major parties is no longer pledging that they will abide by the election results, whether they win or lose, the democratic system of government is not threatened with harm. It is wounded already. Just like threats to the rule of law. Threats to democracy are also here now. Poll workers and election workers have been chased out of those jobs by the thousands, by violence and harassment and threats that are already here and that have already done their work. Who is going to stand up and say, okay, well, I'm capable, I'm brave, I'm willing to do something hard for my country this year, and I can take one of those jobs, I can take one of those seats. I can drive people to the polls and door knock for a campaign that I wasn't planning on working for. I will work at a polling place, right? Who's going to stand up and do that? Because thousands of experienced poll workers have been chased from their jobs because an anti-democratic movement in this country, led by the former president, has produced such an environment of threat and harassment and violence around those very low-level jobs in the technical part of our democracy that those jobs are unfilled. Who will fill those jobs? Who will do that work? It's not an esoteric thing. It is a practical thing. And the time is now. It's here.